Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Acting Chief Yogananda Pittman for the United States Capitol Police. It is with a heavy heart that I come here this afternoon to shed some light on the incident that occurred at the United States Capitol.
The supplemental guard has arrived at South Barricade.
At approximately 1:02 hours this afternoon, a suspect entered what we refer to as the North Barricade of the Capitol. The suspect rammed his car into two of our officers and then hit the North Barricade barrier. At such time, the suspect exited the vehicle with a knife in hand. Our officers then engaged that suspect. He did not respond to verbal commands. The suspect did start lunging toward U.S. Capitol Police officers, at which time U.S. Capitol Police officers fired upon the suspect. At this time, the suspect has been pronounced deceased. Two U.S. Capitol Police officers were transported to two different hospitals, and it is with a very, very heavy heart that I announce one of our officers has succumbed to his injuries. We are not able to release any information, names, age, date of birth, or anything of that nature at this time because we still have to notify the next of kin. I just ask that the public continue to keep U.S. Capitol Police and their families in your prayers. This has been an extremely difficult time for U.S. Capitol Police after the events of January 6th and now the events that have occurred here today. So I ask that you keep our U.S. Capitol Police family in your thoughts and prayers. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to the Metropolitan Police Chief, Mr. Robert Conti, for the Metropolitan Police Department's portion of this investigation. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Robert Conti, Acting Chief of the Metropolitan Police Department. Our members responded to the U.S. Capitol today just after 1 o'clock p.m. To investigate an officer-involved shooting. At this time, the Metropolitan Police Department's Homicide Division, as well as our Internal Affairs Division, will now take over the investigation with respect to the shooting death that occurred, as well as the officer's death. There's not a lot of information that we can release to the public at this time, but we certainly will be working very closely with our partners at the Park Police, at the U.S. Capitol Police. At this time, I just want to extend my deepest condolences on behalf of the entire Metropolitan Police Department to all of the officers at the United States Capitol Police for their service and unfortunately for the loss of life that have occurred here today at the United States Capitol Police.
Chief, is there an ongoing threat here on Capitol Hill or in the neighborhood? What can you tell residents that live here as well as folks that work in this area?
At this time, it does not appear to be an ongoing threat. Obviously, we're in the very early stages of our investigation. We need to obviously understand the motivation behind this senseless act. So the Metropolitan Police Department will certainly be doing that.
I know you said the suspect was dead, sir. Any reason to know that he was known to Capitol Police or MPD beforehand? Any indication that he was somebody that had been around the Capitol before, maybe spotted, anything like that?
It does not appear that he is known to the Capitol Police or the Metropolitan Police Department at this time.
Is this a terrorism-related?
Sir?
Is this a terrorism-related incident?
It does not appear to be terrorism-related, but obviously we'll continue to investigate to see if there's some type of nexus along those lines.
Will National Guard's posture change at all? What's their mission look like the next couple of days?
I'll refer that to the United States Capitol Police.
Chief, did the suspect say anything or yell anything at the time?
I would say that at this time, the investigation is still in its preliminary stages, so we don't have that information. And the Capitol Police, as far as its security posture, remains in a steady state at this time. We are very thankful for our National Guard partnership. We do have National Guard on the campus, but the security posture at this time remains the same.
Chief, you said that obviously the motive, you're still looking at the motive. I understand that. Any reason to believe that there was any specific target of member of was there a specific member of Congress that the suspect may have been trying to go after? Any indication who that may have been, if that was the case?
We do not have the suspect on file with U.S. Capitol Police, so there's no indication at this time that there's any nexus to any member of Congress.
Can you speak also to
Yes, ma'am.
Drugs or alcohol involved? Do you believe you found any of that in the car?
We cannot confirm that, but the investigation is ongoing. The suspect did exit the vehicle with a knife in hand, and at that time he started to lunge toward, run aggressively toward U.S. Capitol Police Office.
Any weapons?
No, that part of the investigation is still ongoing. The scene is still being processed by Metropolitan Police Department, so we will have additional information at a later time.
Was the suspect transported to a hospital?
Acted alone.
Did the suspect ever come in contact? I know you mentioned the lunge, but did the suspect come in contact and wrestle with the police officer there?
The investigation is ongoing. From what we can see from video at this time, I do not see the suspect wrestling with a U.S. Capitol Police officer, but when he exited the vehicle, the knife was clearly in his hand, and he did start to run toward the officers.
Can you describe the kind of knife, the type of knife?
So at this time, this is all the questions that I am going to take. I turn it back over to Metropolitan Police Department's chief. Again, I ask you to please keep the United States Capitol Police family in your thoughts and prayers at this time. It has been an extremely difficult and challenging year for us, but we will get through this, and we do appreciate the community's support. Thank you.
Can you give us an update on the second officer's condition?
Hey, folks. We understand that you guys have a lot of questions. Obviously, this is a complex investigation. We are going to be putting out more information as we can on social media, and if we decide to do any more briefings later on, we'll of course let you guys know right away. Thank you.
Chief, can you give us an update on...
Chief Conti, can we ask you one more question?
Sure.
One question I have, looking at the grand fabric of all of this, USCP has changed their intelligence, the way they're sharing it. They've been doing what they can to try to beef up the security here, and still they're under attack. What is the answer?
Yeah, well, I think, just part of our responsibilities and duties as law enforcement officers, we're here to protect and serve community. Clearly, this was someone who was actively trying to just get at whoever or whatever. We just don't know right now. So we have a responsibility to investigate that, to get to the bottom of this, whether the attack was at law enforcement or whoever. We have a responsibility to get to the bottom of it, and we'll do that. Thank you.
Suspect die at the scene or at the hospital, sir?
Brian, Whitney.
Okay, everyone, if you're just joining us here on CBC News Network, we've been taking you live to Washington, D.C., where the U.S. Capitol has been on lockdown as a result of a security incident. So, to bring you up to speed, as we just heard from the acting chief of the Capitol Police, Chief Pittman, she said that at 1:02 p.m. Eastern Time, they started receiving calls of an incident where a suspect entered the north barricade of the U.S. Capitol. We understand, according to the police, that the suspect rammed a vehicle into the barricade and ended up striking two police officers. Then the suspect exited the car, had a knife, and according to the police, was lunging at the police, running aggressively at the police. That's when the police fired their weapons at the suspect. We now have confirmation. The big news is, folks, that the suspect is dead, but unfortunately also a Capitol Hill police officer has succumbed to their injuries, and they too have died. No names have been released at this point. Next of kin need to be informed about what is happening, but this is a terrible incident that's taken place once again in Washington, just 2 or 3 months after that horrible scene we all witnessed on January 6th when the Capitol was under siege of a group of protesters who really became rioters by the end of the day, and a number of lives were lost as a result. CBC's Ellen Morrow has been watching this and listening in alongside with me. Ellen, now that we know that a police officer has lost their life, what does this do to the temperature in Washington, D.C.?
Well, it's obviously been a remarkably hard time for members of the U.S. Capitol Police. Obviously, this sad news today that an officer died in this ramming incident. But you mentioned, of course, the January 6th attack on the Capitol. An officer lost his life in that attack, Brian Sicknick. After that attack, 2 other police officers of the U.S. Capitol Police took their own lives after that attack. So it's been a really hard few months for that force. Now, going through what we heard from the U.S. Capitol Police official there, you know, that confrontation, the detail of the suspect getting out of the car, very clearly, she said, had a knife lunged at these officers, and now the suspect as well killed in that encounter. But we did not obviously have that level of detail before hearing that briefing. That certainly changes the nature of this attack, and it changes, as you said, the temperature in the city. You know, there was this very intense, widespread security perimeter around the U.S. Capitol as a result of the January 6th attack. It was on lockdown. It was completely fenced in, and you can see behind me, I hope you can see, maybe we can push in some of the National Guard troops. They've been here since January guarding the Capitol complex. Some of that security in just the last few weeks has been taken down. There's still a fence perimeter around parts of Capitol Hill itself, but the wider perimeter was taken down a few weeks ago. And I remember just sort of walking around the Capitol complex by the Supreme Court and seeing National Guard troops walking around that area as well. But it didn't feel certainly as tense as it would have felt in the days following the January 6th attack. Obviously, what has happened here today certainly changes the mood. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but might change some of the security questions and action around Capitol Hill. Obviously, you know, the memories, the trauma of that day re-triggered by what we saw happen here today. Now, we don't know who the officer who was killed is. As you said, they have to notify next of kin of that officer. We also don't really have any details on the suspect in this violence today either. The police were asked about motivation, any information on that, and they stressed that this is still obviously very, very early in this investigation.
Ellen, let's talk about the significance of the day itself, because it is Good Friday. As you mentioned before the press conference started, most politicians wouldn't be there. It would mostly be journalists and the police presence that would be there. So as you say, we don't have a motive. Both of the chiefs that we heard from the Metropolitan Police and from the Capitol Police Services said, hey, it's very early in the investigation. We don't have a motive. They did say the suspect did not seem to be someone who was known to them. But taking all of this into account, that it is a holy holiday on a Christian calendar, that there have been such a spike in politically motivated attacks in the United States for the past few years, you know that people are going to start raising questions around motive. And so how do you imagine that the politicians in Washington are going to have to try and manage this situation?
Well, I think the most important thing we can do, obviously, this early in this investigation is just to keep emphasizing that we have no idea yet on the motive or who the suspect is. Of course, there will be early speculation as to what could have driven the attack on those officers today, but we just simply don't have the answer to that. So it's hard to predict how lawmakers might weigh in on that. I think right now there's just going to be a lot of concern expressed for the family of that officer who lost their life today. And you know, the officer was asked, could this be terrorism motivated? He said there's no indication of that. Again, saying, though, that it's obviously very early in the investigation. And obviously we don't do any favors by speculating on what the motive of this violence here today was.
Absolutely right. CBC's Ellen Morrow in Washington. Thank you, Ellen.